All right, so we're talking about the importance of bank failures in causing the Great Depression. And we said people scrambled to get to banks because they realized they don't have a lot of cash on hand because they've been loaning it out to stockbrokers. They've been investing in the market, and banks don't normally keep a lot of cash on hand anyway. So banks are going to be in big trouble. They're going to start failing, and like we said, where it's really going to affect average Americans is that they're going to lose their life savings from this bank. When their bank closes, they're panicked because they don't have their money. They don't have access to their money. Now, we've since remedied that. If your bank were to go out of business today, the government would reimburse you. But back then, they didn't do that. They're like, listen, you just got to find a good bank and hope they have good business practices. So bank failures are going to be important because not only are people going to lose their life savings, but when that bank doesn't exist anymore, banks are unable to provide loans for businesses, for homes, for automobiles, the things in life that we need. And not only that, but what do you think is going to happen to the banks that do remain in business in terms of their loan practices? Are they going to be friendlier in giving out loans, or are they going to become a little more tight-fisted and less willing to take risks? And the answer is that they're not going to take risks at all when it comes to loaning that out because they know they can't afford to lose any more money. So bank failures are going to be one of the primary causes. Another problem, bad business practices. We kind of mentioned this when we talked about the market crash. A lot of companies were involved in overproduction. They always believed that people would need more of their product. And that simply was just wishful thinking. What happens is, like we used the example last time of refrigerators. A company might build another, like let's say they sold 25,000 refrigerators last year. They build another 25,000 anticipating to have at least as good a year. But what they don't realize is that not as many people need refrigerators anymore, and so they may only sell 10,000, meaning they have 15,000 refrigerators that they can't sell. And that means they're just going to sit there in a warehouse, and you obviously don't want to produce more because you're going to be dumping more money into a product that people already aren't wanting to buy. The bad business practices also extended to farms. Remember, we said initially, after the end of World War I, there's a major food shortage in Europe and over towards the Middle East where the old Ottoman Empire was. And so American farms were largely making up for the European and Asian needs of foods. And so that's going all well and good. But the farmers did the same thing that many factories did. They overproduced. They didn't realize that European farms would recover quite as quickly. And in many instances, American farmers are not going to be able to sell their crops. There's what we call a glut in the market. The demand is not, the demand is still there for food, but the supply is way greater than it had been in recent years. And what happens is that many of these American farms, and this is also true of European farms, they're competing against each other, and neither American farms nor European farms are able to sell all their crops. And with crops, if you don't sell them, they're just eventually going to go bad. You're unable to consume them all yourselves, and eventually they're just going to sit there and rot. And so many of these farms are not only going to be able to not sell their product, but when there's way too much supply for the average demand, that means prices are going to go down. And farms are going to get hit in a bad way, not only with their business practices, but with another problem that we call the Dust Bowl. In the United States, in the Midwest, a series of dirt and dust storms are going to hit throughout that part of the country. And you can see right here these massive dirt storms. And to properly give it scale, you can imagine what the size of a typical two-story house is, and you can see some people in there, the average height of people. Many of these dust storms are a couple miles high and sometimes as long as 50 to 100 miles. And these dust storms are going to be problems for the crops. The dirt and debris gets mixed up. The topsoil was extremely loose, and there had been a drought in the area. So when there's no rain, that means the soil's not compacted down as much, and the drought is going to dry it up, and that means strong winds will blow that dirt around rather quickly. You can see right here in that region of the country is where they refer to the Dust Bowl as, and it's really in that Oklahoma Panhandle, where part of Texas and a little bit of New Mexico and Colorado, but it expands outward, and you see that many of these people are going to leave the area. Those states with the dashed lines going through them are going to lose significant amounts of population. During the 1930s, the census estimates that Oklahoma lost about 10% of its population because they were farmers who just gave up. And we're not talking about dust storms happening maybe once every year. There was a point where you would get an average of about 3 dust storms per month in that Dust Bowl region in those darker red areas. And so you get this massive dirt storm, and here's what happens as a result. You get this massive deposit of these giant, like instead of a snowfall, you get a dirt fall. And unlike snow, it simply doesn't melt. It's covering up everything. It gets in your house, it gets in your food, and it caused a lot of medical problems too. There was a common ailment at the time they referred to as dust pneumonia, that no matter how hard you tried, you would inhale some of this dirt and dust particles, and it would cause you to cough up like phlegm that's coated in dust and dirt. And if your animals were caught out in this storm and you couldn't get them inside fast enough, it would kill them. Autopsies on animals, they would cut open their stomachs and find something like 1 inch, 2 inches of dirt and debris in there. And so it's a massive problem for farmers who are trying to get started, and now they don't have enough crops to go around. Farmers are losing everything. They can't pay their mortgage, and so they're going to be forced to move. Many of them move out west because California, where farmland is a little bit richer and more developed at that time, that was going to be something it's all they knew to do. So they're like, we'll go to California. If you're ever familiar, a great book at the time, John Steinbeck, part of the 1920s kind of lost generation of writers, John Steinbeck wrote a book called The Grapes of Wrath about a family from Oklahoma who moves out west. In fact, so many folks from Oklahoma moved out to California, they started referring anybody affected by the Dust Bowl who moved as Okies, because they're from Oklahoma, they presumed. And so American farms are in a really bad way. This is a definite cause for the Great Depression. The farms, at first, they're overproducing, and now because of the Dust Bowl, they can't produce quite enough. Okay? Now, part of the causes in here, too, are linked to Herbert Hoover, the President of the United States, when the Depression hits. You don't want to beat up on Herbert Hoover too much, but Herbert Hoover's going to make some bad decisions that turn the Great Depression even worse. Here's a picture of Hoover, and at the time, he was considered kind of an economic genius. He was responsible in World War I for the food effort, managing the food effort to get food to the troops over in World War I, and he was kind of considered a wizard with numbers and money, but he's going to make some bad decisions. One of the things that he does is to help American businesses grow, he's going to put tariffs in place. Those are taxes on imported goods. So anything coming from overseas, he's going to put a tariff on it, and that would make it more expensive and hopefully encourage people to buy American products, which seems like a good idea. The problem is, though, is that other countries put tariffs in place on the United States and their products as well as a retaliation, because they're like, we have to protect our own interests also. So his decision actually ends up slowing international trade. And remember, at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, beginning of early 20th century, countries worked really hard to develop an international economic system without trade barriers. And Herbert Hoover is helping to put those back in place because he thinks it's going to help American businesses. The reality is he not only hurts his own businesses, but hurts European businesses as well. And they end up doing the same. Right? Herbert Hoover's going to make another dumb decision. He's going to contract the money supply. He's going to take money out of circulation. His idea was that since the United States is on the gold standard, if we take paper money, some of the paper money, out of circulation, that means the existing currency will be worth more, and it'll be more valuable to Americans, and it'll increase purchasing power. The problem with that is that this is a time where people radically needed cash. They don't have food. They don't have a place to live. They can't afford the basics. And you need more money in circulation. People look back at Herbert Hoover now and say he made a terrible mistake because he should have inserted more money into the system. A lot of people had encouraged Herbert Hoover to take the United States off the gold standard, and he wouldn't do it. He thought the gold standard was still the way to go. Okay? Now, we'll talk about some other problems encountered in the Depression. So there's major causes, some bad government decisions, bad business practices, of course, the Dust Bowl, and of course, bank failures are the major causes of our Depression.